Every engineer who saw the plan said the same thing. You cannot do this. You cannot take a giant American V8, aim all of its power at the front wheels, and expect the thing to drive in a straight line. The front wheels are the ones that steer the car. Load them up with that much muscle, and they fight you. They spin. They tear themselves apart. It had been tried once before, decades earlier, and that car ended up a cautionary tale. Then, in 1966, Oldsmobile built the Toronado, and it worked. What did Oldsmobile actually pull off? Under that long hood sat a 425 cubic inch rocket V8, 385 horsepower, 475 pound-feet of torque. That was more twist than most muscle cars of the day could brag about, and every bit of it went to the wheels up front. No company in America had sold anything like it in almost 30 years. And instead of shredding itself, the Toronado went out and won. Motor Trend named it the Car of the Year for 1966. The car everyone swore could not exist was suddenly sitting in showrooms wearing a trophy. So the question was never whether it worked. It did. The question is how. So how do you send 475 pound-feet through the same two wheels that steer the car and still keep it pointed where you aim it? For most of the 20th century, the answer out of Detroit was simple. You do not. You put the engine up front and you drive the rear wheels, because that is what works. Front-wheel drive was fine for something small and slow. Loaded with real power, and the physics turned ugly. All that torque wanted to yank the steering right out of your hands. A nasty habit engineers call torque steer. The front wheels would scrabble for grip under hard acceleration, and the joints that let a wheel steer and pull at the same time had a reputation for wearing out and letting go at the worst possible moment. The last American company to build a front-drive car with any real ambition had been Cord back in 1937. It was a beautiful machine, remembered mostly for a fussy, troublesome gearbox and a habit of running hot. It sold poorly, the company folded, and for the next 3 decades, front-wheel drive in America carried a quiet label. Too radical, too expensive, too complicated, and always seeming to end in tears. So when Oldsmobile said it wanted a big, powerful, front-drive luxury coupe, the polite response around the industry was that this had already been tried. Thanks. And it did not end well. It looked like a small, doomed side project at the time. It was not. The Toronado did not begin life as an engineering dare. As the story goes, it began as a drawing that was never even meant to be built. An Oldsmobile designer named David North had sketched a long, low, sharp-edged coupe in a deep shade of red, a styling exercise with no home and no future, the kind of thing that ends up pinned to a studio wall and forgotten. North had it in mind as a smaller car. Then, General Motors went hunting for a new personal luxury coupe. The design chief, Bill Mitchell, pulled North's red car down off that wall, and management sized it up onto a bigger platform. The same underpinnings that carried the Buick Riviera. The shape nobody had planned to sell became the shape of the Toronado, and it reached the street looking remarkably close to that original sketch. And what a shape it was. A long hood, a smooth fastback roofline, and muscular arches flared out over the wheels. There was no post between the side windows, so the whole side of the car opened up clean. The headlights hid away behind panels in the nose until you flicked them on. That enormous flat hood and those blistered wheel arches gave it a muscular, almost aggressive stance you simply did not see on a luxury car back then. It looked fast standing still, and it borrowed a few cues on purpose. The horizontal bars across the nose, and the way the fenders dropped low. A quiet tip of the hat to that doomed Cord from 30 years earlier. Even the name was a bit of theater. As the story is told, Toronado did not really mean anything. It was a made-up word, lifted from an earlier show car, picked because it sounded like power and a little like a storm rolling in. It was not Spanish for tornado, whatever the salesman told you. But the cleverest thing about the whole design was something you could only really feel from inside. Because there was no drive shaft running back to the rear wheels, there was no hump down the middle of the floor. The cabin floor was flat. 3 people could sit up front without one of them straddling a transmission tunnel. It was the kind of everyday comfort that front-wheel drive quietly made possible, and almost nobody at the time connected that flat, easy floor to the wild engineering hiding under the hood. Those first 2 model years wore the cleanest version of the shape, before later restyling softened it. And that is the Toronado most folks picture when they picture one at all. Here is the detail almost everyone missed at the time. Oldsmobile did not get lucky with the Toronado. They ground it out. While the rest of Detroit was deep in a horsepower war, dropping bigger and bigger engines into the same basic rear-drive cars everyone already knew how to build, Oldsmobile quietly pointed its best engineers at a problem nobody else was even trying to solve. The front drive system had a name: the unitized power package. And it took the better part of 7 years and something like 1.5 million test miles before a single customer ever turned a key. Nobody in America had built a powerful front drive car for the mass market before, so there was no playbook to copy. Oldsmobile was writing it from scratch. And they ran the thing through blistering heat and hard cold and mile after mile of punishment because a 2-inch chain and a split gearbox had to prove they could shrug off everything a normal driveline shrugged off. And then some. The problem they had to beat was one of packaging and one of physics at the very same time. A big V8 sits lengthwise in the engine bay, and it is heavy and it is long. A front drive car needs the transmission tucked in beside it, not stretched out behind it, or the whole thing gets too long to fit under the hood. So the engineers took a heavy-duty automatic, the turbo hydromatic, and did something that sounds almost too simple to work. They split it in 2. The part that multiplies the engine's twist stayed behind the motor, where it belonged. The gearbox itself was turned around and mounted right alongside the engine, pointing forward, so the whole package folded up into roughly the space a normal engine bay would take. And the 2 halves were joined by a chain. Not some flimsy little chain. It was a steel chain, about 2 inches wide, developed with the Morse Company, strong enough to carry everything 475 pound-feet could throw at it. There was no tensioner and no adjuster to rattle loose over the years, because the chain was stretched tight at the factory and left exactly that way. Think about that for a second. The heart of the most advanced American car of its day was a 2-inch chain, running silently in a bath of oil. There was no manual gearbox offered at all, and honestly, there was no room for one anyway. Then came the torque steer, the thing that was supposed to rip the wheel out of your hands. Oldsmobile leaned on torsion bars up front, a first for a General Motors passenger car, and built the front wheels around constant velocity joints, the kind that let a wheel pull hard and steer sharp without binding. They carefully tuned the drive shafts feeding each front wheel so the pull came on evenly, instead of dragging the nose off to one side. They did not get there by luck. It took years of chipping away at it. The chief engineer, a man named John Belts, staked his name on the whole idea, while plenty of people above him were sweating over it, and there was a lot riding on whether he was right. And there was a hidden bonus buried in all of it. A front-drive car pulls itself along from the front instead of shoving from the rear, with the weight of that heavy engine sitting right over the wheels doing the work. So it hooked up and dug in where rear-drive cars would light up their tires and go nowhere. There is a reason Toronado owners used to swear by them in snow and rain, back when everything else on the block was fishtailing at the first sign of ice. Oldsmobile could have stopped once the thing merely ran. They did not. They kept testing until the car that was supposed to be undrivable simply drove. One more thing about that engine, because it matters. The Toronado did not just borrow the V8 out of a regular Oldsmobile and call it done. The standard 425 in the rest of the lineup made 375 horsepower. The Toronado's version was worked over for a little more, 385, because the whole point of the car was to prove the front wheels could take the strongest thing Oldsmobile had. This was the flagship. It was supposed to be too much. If you have made it this far, you already know the kind of story this channel likes to dig up. The machines that got written off and quietly turned out to matter. So go ahead and subscribe, and we will keep pulling them back into the light. So the gamble had paid off in exactly the spots the doubters swore it would fail. Which makes it almost funny that the Toronado came closest to real trouble in the one place nobody was worried about: the brakes. For all the years poured into that drivetrain, the first Toronado rolled out of the showroom on plain drum brakes at all four corners. That was normal enough for 1966. It was also a problem, because the Toronado was not a normal car. This was a coupe that weighed close to 4,500 pounds, nearly 2¼ tons, and it could run all the way up to around 130 miles an hour. Ask drum brakes to haul that much car down from that kind of speed more than a couple of times in a row, and they would start to fade, going soft and long right when you leaned on them hardest. So there you had it. The fastest, heaviest, most advanced thing on the road. And the one part built to slow it down was the one part nobody had bothered to reinvent. So yeah, not ideal. To Oldsmobile's credit, they did not let it linger. For 1967, front disc brakes showed up on the options list, which was exactly the upgrade the car had been begging for from day one. The gamble had a weak spot, and the weak spot got fixed fast. And once it was sorted, the Toronado got to simply be what it was, which was unlike anything else on an American road. It cornered flatter than a big coupe had any right to, since the weight was over the wheels that were pulling, so it dug in and went where you pointed it, instead of plowing wide through every bend. The people who tested it could hardly believe how planted a car that size felt. It reached 60 miles an hour in around 8 seconds, which for a 2¼ ton luxury car in the middle of the 1960s was genuinely quick. Even the tires were special, built to handle the odd job of steering, pulling, and stopping all through the same two front wheels. And the Toronado did every bit of it while looking like it had rolled in from 10 years into the future. It was not cheap, priced well north of $4,000 when a plain family sedan cost a good deal less. And buyers lined up anyway. Oldsmobile moved about 41,000 of them in that first year alone. And it was not just the critics who came around. Buyers did too, in numbers that turned a risky, expensive experiment into a genuine hit, which is the part that mattered most inside the company. Because a clever idea nobody buys is just an expensive footnote. The car that could not be built was now the car nobody could stop talking about. So the Toronado had defied the odds and taken its trophy. But what happened after that made the trophy look like the small part of the story. Because the moment Oldsmobile proved that a big engine could drive the front wheels and live to tell about it, the rest of General Motors sat up and took notice. Within a single year, Cadillac took that same front drive package, that same split transmission and steel chain, and slid it under its own flagship, the Eldorado. Think about what that means. Cadillac was the crown jewel of the whole company, the car that was supposed to be above criticism. and General Motors was confident enough in a system barely a year old to bolt it under the most prestigious nameplate it owned. Suddenly, the wild experiment was not a one-off gamble anymore. It was company property, spreading across the lineup. And the Toronado name did not go quietly into the night either. It stuck around, badge after badge, through 4 generations, all the way to 1992, which is a long run for a car that started out as a sketch nobody meant to build. But the strangest proof that Oldsmobile had gotten it right turned up somewhere nobody expected. That same basic front drive hardware, the split transmission and the chain, ended up under a General Motors motorhome, a rolling apartment weighing several tons. This was a genuinely enormous machine, the kind of thing families loaded up with everything they owned and drove clear across the country. If a 2-inch chain and a turned-around gearbox could haul something that big around for years without complaint, then every skeptic who swore it would never survive one powerful coupe had been answered about as completely as anyone could ask for. And this is the part that outlived all of them. Walk out to your driveway right now and look under almost any ordinary car sitting there. The engine is up front, and the front wheels are the ones doing the driving. The layout that Detroit spent 30 years calling too radical and too fragile is the exact layout that most ordinary cars are built on today. The Toronado did not invent that idea, but it was the big, loud, unlikely proof that it could be done with real power and real weight, and made to last. The thing that was supposed to be too much turned out to be the future, just wearing a chrome grille and a fastback roof about 40 years early. These days, a Toronado turns up at a car show and the crowd wanders right on past it, never realizing they're looking at the machine that gave front-wheel drive a second life and made it respectable again. It just sits there quietly, the way it always did, keeping its best trick hidden under that long hood. But one builder looked at this front-drive Toronado, decided that one rocket V8 was nowhere near enough, and bolted in a second one. That machine is where this goes next.